Nicole Auerbach, theathletic.com, covers college athletics, covers college football, and has seen all of what we have talked about and what we have seen as well. Nicole, thanks for your time. We appreciate it with Craig Paul and David Smoak. If I asked you to forecast where college football will be in 2 years, do you know?
No, and I don't think anyone really does. I mean, I think people are preparing for a wide range of things to happen. But, right now everyone's waiting to see if and what the Transformation Committee recommends in terms of a bunch of rule changes that we could see as soon as this summer. And that's where, when you talk about transfer windows and other things like that, unlimited personnel, staff sizes, changes to scholarship limits, that's coming from that group. But they're tasked with determining what Division I membership requires and what this looks like. Is football governed the same way as other sports? All of that is still TBD from that group. Meanwhile, you have different lawsuits and different legal pressures also being applied as cases are working their way through a system. One that started with a former Villanova football player, that one's still just kind of hanging around. So you don't really know where, the next major change is necessarily coming from, but there's pressure internally and externally for change. And, we're just going to have to see. But I think, right now you have a lot of people thinking about, okay, what happens if athletes become employees and it's an employee-employer relationship? What does it mean when, the next round of media rights deals are done and there's separation from the SEC and the Big Ten and everybody else? Like, everyone's thinking about these things. But again, it's sort of like, we have to see how the next 1 year comes out, 2 years, 5 years to really have a sense of what it is. I think if you could tell people that they could just fast forward 5 years and, this is what it's going to look like, I think a lot of people would take them up on that to know. I think the uncertainty is one of the biggest challenges right now.
Nicole, the conferences don't have to, adhere to any divisions anymore. I guess the next domino to fall might be the Big Ten. That's a conference I know you're a Michigan grad and you know it well. What do you expect them to do when it comes to their divisions and scheduling?
Well, I am selfishly hoping that all of the major conferences get rid of divisions because I just think the two best teams playing each other makes the most sense. I think it positions everyone well for the college football playoff, no matter what size it is. I think it's the best for fans. I think it's the best for TV viewership. The Big Ten is one of those leagues that's had imbalance between its divisions. And so I think that, it would be a good thing. But, part of the reason that some of the dominoes fell really quickly, like the ACC had obviously been talking about it, looking at scheduling models. Pac-12 had already voted on it, and they were the ones who had pushed this piece of legislation forward. As it unfolded last week, and the NCAA Division I Council announced that they had changed that rule so that conferences could determine how they wanted to set up their championship games. I asked someone in the Big Ten, if they were going to announce something imminently because the Pac-12 was so fast, and they said they hadn't voted on it yet. And so, I don't know what the timing is going to be for everyone. But I do hope eventually we get there. We do know that, the Sun Belt is not going to change its divisional structure. I think there are certain people that are going to stick with what they have because of the regional elements of it or even, just the travel, the way that things are set up. But, I also don't think you need to announce it overnight. I think, we could see what the Pac-12 did, which was, hey, your schedule's already set for this year in divisions, but we're going to change the way we're going to do conference, win percentage, but they're still the same schedule. And then I think you have some others that are maybe going to try to package that stuff together and change it when they change the schedule. So ultimately I hope we get there in these leagues that have imbalance, but the SEC is adding members. And so they were going to have to look at a new scheduling model anyway. So I think all of this is good. I think it's good to, go to a pod scheduling or whatever you want to call it, where everyone gets to play everyone in their league because it's the point of being in a conference if you don't play them. But also I do think two best teams in the championship game is the best case scenario for your best team and for your second best team. So, I don't know how the dominoes are going to fall or when, or if it's all for next season or whatever it looks like. But I do hope that all the major conferences get there, just because I think that's a win for college football.
Nicole, what were your thoughts, and what kind of, thoughts have you heard from others, even on Greg Sankey and Scott Strickland, both talking about the discussions revolving around an SEC championship or their own college football playoff?
Well, there's a lot of people putting ideas out right now. I mean, this is the time of year when this happens. You have people talk about rule changes that are coming, that they would like to see. It's spring meeting season, and people talk. I think, some of that certainly comes from frustrations around the way the college football playoff expansion process went. I think that the people who were pushing it and were supportive of it got very, very frustrated by the end about, the unwillingness to reach a conclusion and to be able to work through issues to expand the playoffs. So I think, when you've seen Greg Sankey in the immediate aftermath of that, I mean, I was around them that day. They almost officially tabled it in Indianapolis, the championship game, but we're basically done with it. And, he kept saying, the SEC is fine at 4, and that, they were willing to come to a table. They were willing to compromise. Maybe they're not going to be willing to do all of that another time. So there has been a certain rhetoric coming out of that league for a couple months now. And, everyone was really frustrated coming out of that process. And the SEC has been very, very vocal about, we don't need this, even though there's lots of benefits to tethering everyone together, having a true national championship. But, this is the time of year where people are frustrated, where people talk. It's never too surprising when people float anything these days.
There's no way that anybody would support just one conference winning the national championship by themselves, is there?
What do you mean?
As far as
who would have
just the thought about the SEC at some point that, again, this is speculation. Hey, we're just going to have our own national championship. There's no way that would work, is there?
Well, I don't think you could call it a national championship.
That's what I'm saying.
One league. So no. I mean, I think, the idea of a national championship is something that is obviously very important to a lot of people, and it's why everyone is connected. I mean, this is a really decentralized, deregulated space where you don't have, it's not like pro sports, you don't have a commissioner, you don't have all these things, but you have to have all of these different leagues in it to determine the national champion. So yeah, I mean, I don't see how you could do that. If a league theoretically wanted to have, a bracket or whatever for its postseason or conference championship. I mean, it doesn't really work in football because you're adding games and we talk about wear and tear and health and safety stuff. But no, I mean, if one league tried to name its champion a national champion, I think there would be a ton of pushback to that. That doesn't make sense.
Nicole Auerbach, theathletic.com, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio.
Nicole, we were just talking to a guest a little while ago. We were talking about the NCAA and all the warnings that they had about what was coming down the pipeline. I mean, going so far back as the 2007 with the video game issues and all that. And then yet there was a reminder of, well, it's the schools that are making these decisions. So where does the conflict come into play as far as you hear all this frustration, and yet the frustration is coming from the people who, in theory, are the ones that are in charge, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two ways to answer that, because the question is really like, what is leadership? And after different rounds of frustration with Mark Emmert, some people would say like, nope, this is on us. It's a membership organization. We're the schools, we should have done more. But you also have other people saying, listen, the leader of any organization, even if there are all these different like governing boards and presidents have to vote something, can be proactive and not reactive, can lead on certain things. I mean, some of the stuff that came out of the national office with strategy involving the Alston case, which obviously was 9-0 against the NCAA, but the decision to appeal it up to the Supreme Court and some of the strategies around it, you can pin squarely on the national office. But again, I think, it's more about how to lead. If you believe that, if Mark Emmert and different people very high up could have, recognized that these things were going to be problems, that the tide was turning on things, public opinion was shifting, and that their legal standing was more precarious than they like to admit, you certainly could have had action years prior. I mean, they did eventually realize they had to concede the name, image, and likeness point, but it was so late that they weren't even able to implement actual legislation because it was coming in the wake of the Supreme Court case. And, it had to be deregulated. It had to be all this. I mean, I think if you had been proactive in these spaces years ago, 5, 7, 8 years ago, the bullseye is not as big on your back. And maybe you don't get to the point where you have federal and state legislators teeing off on you trying to make all of these laws, especially in NIL, if you've already changed the rule in that space. And certainly, some of the legal challenges that have happened. So it's more just that where was the vision? Where was the leadership? Where was anything proactive instead of, boxing yourself into a position where you have state legislatures passing different laws. You have, obviously everyone's kind of like begging the federal government to supersede that, but you have the judiciary department, the DOJ and states and, possibly Congress, like determining your rules for you because you weren't proactive. I think that's something that everyone's frustrated with. And people, yes, even people who will say, this was on us, I think will even acknowledge that there can be leadership and vision in the role of the NCAA president in the national office that wasn't there the last, decade.
Obviously, we're going to see new governance rules here in the coming months. How quickly do you expect to see a new president hired after that, or do you think they'll come before?
I think that we're going to see more clarity about what the job is probably before they hire that. Because, again, like this transformation committee is trying to figure out, what does Division I look like? Are there subdivisions? How do you structure the governance? I don't know if anyone would want to take a job like that. First of all, there's a lot of people who have already said they don't want that job, but without knowing exactly how it works and what you're overseeing. So, obviously the way that they announced it was that Mark Emmert's stepping down effective next June at the latest. So I don't think anyone expects that it'll take all that long, but I also don't think that it's an immediate process because you are going through the governance reform piece. So, I think any reasonable person would want to know who they'd be reporting to, what they'd be overseeing before they would take that job. So we'll have to see how all of that comes down, but I do think there will probably be clarity about, Division I membership or, again, some of the other rules around scholarships and staff sizes and stuff like that will probably be determined before we actually know who's going to be heading up that organization.
Nicole, is there any issue that's on the horizon? I mean, there's a lot of issues in front of the big money folks right now, obviously, that have all kind of piled up on them, especially over the last couple of years. But is there another aspect of this that's not being talked about as much that you see coming down the train tracks?
Yeah, it's the scholarship limit piece. One of the things the Transformation Committee is getting feedback on is a concept saying that, we kind of abolish scholarship limits the way that we think of them. And baseball is a great example of this, but it's not clear if this could be something that would implement across to all sports or just the so-called equivalency sports that have partial scholarships. But think about it this way. Baseball has 11.7 scholarships. Why? Like it's capped at this really weird number and it's limiting money and opportunity for athletes, which now we know, obviously is a legal issue. So what if you get to a point where, you just totally reframe the way you think about it and a baseball roster is, say, 30 and schools or conferences can decide how much of that they can offer in scholarships. So you could have, maybe the SEC says we really care about baseball. We'll let all of our members offer up to 30 scholarships, full scholarships in baseball. Like basically the cap is the roster size, not some random arbitrary scholarship limit size. So that's something I think people need to start thinking about because we're going to hear more and more about that. I think, again, it's not clear it's just for, Olympic sports or equivalency sports, but you could think about these things for football and basketball as well, which, again, I don't know if that's what ultimately some of these changes will impact them, but you could make the same arguments about the way that they're structured, the way that you make it against baseball. So I think thinking about stuff like that, that's like legal issues, antitrust issues, because it's arbitrarily capping money and opportunities for athletes because it's cheaper, because it's easier to regulate, because, quote, like, competitive balance when that doesn't exist anyway. But you'll see loosening of stuff like that, where it simplifies it to just say, like, here's your roster minimum or maximum, but also, why would you, if this whole enterprise is about creating opportunities and scholarships for high school athletes, why would you cap that at something so low? So I think thinking about stuff that way in terms of not just like, oh, it's easier to manage to have these rules, but to say, what are antitrust issues? What is the most fair thing to do for the athletes, especially in cases involving literal money in their pockets? Those are things that are going to change. So I think scholarship limits is the big thing that people haven't quite realized is coming down the pipe.
Nicole, it used to be where we just covered games and talked about results and scores and stats and stuff like that. It is amazing how much has changed and how much has been on the line and what's still to come in the last year or two. Is it sometimes for you, you covered it on a national basis, we covered in a way that way here with our show, with fans from all over the place, coast to coast? Is it sometimes just almost like a blur?
Yeah, I mean, these off seasons have almost been busier than the season in the last couple of years. So it'd be nice if people took a break for a couple of weeks, let everybody go on vacation and breathe a second. But I don't think that's coming because, like you said, change is coming really fast, coming in a lot of different areas all at once. In any other off season, like one rule change, like the divisions and conference championships or the initial counters, like would be the main story of the off season. And here it's one of many. So it's a lot to keep up with. A lot of things are changing, and they're going to keep changing.
Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate your time as always. Nicole Auerbach with the athletic.com, covers college football and covers college athletics.